Constitution to us. We also need some volunteers for candidate events. I believe October 5th in South Jordan. So if anyone is interested in volunteering, we more than welcome it. Right now I'd like to welcome our three presenters. This is how government works or doesn't work. The doesn't work was presented to me by former Councilman Luke Garrett. He is former councilman from Salt Lake City, now a professor at the University of Utah, professor of political science. I'm sure you're going to tell us all about the ins and outs of Salt Lake, what should and shouldn't be happening, and how you can become more involved. Next to him is our county mayor, Ben McAdams. He can tell us a lot of stories. I'm particularly interested in the Mill Creek issue. And he is of course, school bus fame. I believe you used to drive a school bus, and from what I understand, you're a stealth Uber driver as well. And next to him is Donna Evans. Donna is a former West Jordan mayor and presently a law student. So be very careful about what you say to her. I don't know which of you would like to start. Shall we start with the mayor here?
Sure. What do you want me to talk about? Well, I will say, first of all, yeah, I am a stealth Uber driver. No, yesterday I was driving home and I got a phone call. I pulled over to the side of the road and I was talking on the phone, and an individual came walking up to my car, and I thought, is he going to talk to me or what? And he walked up toward the the passenger side window, and then he went and tried to open the back door, and it was locked. And I rolled down the window. I said, "Can I help you?" He said, "Isn't this a Subaru? Isn't this car a Subaru Outback?" No. Are you my Uber driver? No, I'm your mayor. So, yeah, oops. No, it's great to be here today to talk about when government works and when it doesn't. And I will say we're a little bit of both. Sometimes we work and we work well, and sometimes we don't work well. And sometimes that's by design. Government is intended to be slow and deliberative, and it's intended to you need to build a strong consensus to get things done. Hold it closer and speak louder. Okay, there we go. You may need to remind me from time to time, so if I trail off, just tell me again. Sometimes we work deliberatively, and it's meant to be. Government is intended to be slow. We make big decisions that have real and lasting impacts on people's lives, so it's intended to be a slow process, and sometimes that is frustrating, but I think on the whole it's probably a good thing, because we have such incredible power to do good and to do bad, and the process should then be very deliberative. But so I'll talk about a couple things. I'll talk a little bit about what we've done to change governance in Salt Lake County relating to the townships and the unincorporated areas, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing with homelessness as well. So when I was elected mayor in 2012, one of the issues that we had, at the same time I was running for mayor, there was an initiative on the ballot for Mill Creek to become a city. And I heard from a lot of people on both sides, some who were saying Mill Creek should incorporate, the pro-incorporation people and the pro-status quo people. And I heard some people saying we need to become a city because there are so many decisions that are so important to us, some of the zoning decisions in particular, that shape our community, and those should be made by people who live here in Mill Creek, who understand this community. So we should form a city so that we can have control over what our city looks like. And the other side was saying we need to stay with the county because we like the county services, the unified police department, unified fire authorities, county does snow removal, all of those things. And if we break off, it's going to be more expensive. You don't have the economies of scale. You're not, instead of having one public works director to serve all of unincorporated county, you'd have to hire your own public works director and your own fire chief and your own police chief. And so these arguments, and I was listening. I was campaigning to represent the whole county, so I didn't really get involved on either side and on a local issue in Mill Creek. But as I listened to this debate, I thought you're kind of both right. Is what that if I were there, I wouldn't want the guy who's elected who lives in Magna and Sandy and Salt Lake City to be making zoning decisions for my community. I would want somebody out of my community to be making some of these key decisions. So they were right. And then I heard the other side saying, but the services, and I thought, they're right. And they were both right. And so when I got elected, I had seen this debate had been going on in Mill Creek for years. And it was, the pro local control versus pro regional services. And I looked at that and I thought, in the meantime, what's happening is I think Mill Creek is missing out on, there's some common ground. What are we going to do for Mill Creek what's the future transportation plan? What's the transit plan, the bike path plan, the open space plan, the economic development and businesses? And I felt a lot of those things, there should be a lot of debate around that, and a lot of those are divisive as well, as Luke will tell you. But that's a healthy debate for a community. What direction should the community go in? And instead, this debate had been focused on these other areas. And I thought, well, that seems easily resolvable, because can't you have both? Can't you have local decision making about zoning and still have regional services that are low cost and efficient? And so we proposed that to the legislature. We needed to make some changes to state law to make that possible, that you could have both. And then we put it on the ballot for Mill Creek to decide. We presented two options. One was to become a city, and one was to become what we called a metro township. So, but they would organizations would have a locally elected council that would make local decisions about zoning. And then the decision was, how much did you want to participate in the services? And so we left that up to each community to decide. And so what Mill Creek chose to become a city. They now have a mayor as of January, a mayor and a city council. And yet the conversation about services is still continuing. Do they want to receive services from the county, or do they want to pull out and go it alone? And what's happening with this is largely, I'm going to say it settles at about 80-20. Mill Creek is they're going to stay with unified police and unified fire. They're going to stay with the county for public works and street repair and snow removal, a lot of those big services. They want to pull out. One of the things we offered to them is we could have some of the staffing, the professional staffing, the planning staff that develops the plans. Let them vote on the plans, but we can help to develop some of that. And so they're kind of settling what they want to, how much services they want to share versus how much they want to have local. I don't live in Mill Creek, so it's not my decision. I'm always encouraging. I think the regional services are good. Of course, I'm the provider of regional services, but we're pushing that. But I think it's been a healthy debate about what direction does Mill Creek want to go in. Interestingly, the same debate is happening in other areas of the county. Magna and Kearns are having these very same debates, and I think it's healthy. Instead of debating, we kind of put behind us the discussion about we said, look, some's going to be local and some of your services are going to be regional and some are going to be local. Figure it out. Let's figure it out and then move forward and start talking about a trajectory and a vision for a community. So I think what we've seen over the last 9 months, as that has now taken effect, is a very healthy and vibrant discussion within the communities about what the community wants to be shaped like. So I think that would be an instance of where government works and people are coming together to set a course for themselves. I'm going to leave it there. We can.
How many cities and unincorporated areas are you in charge of?
There are 18 cities, counting Mill Creek now, and then 5 now metro townships. And those metro townships are also incorporated. They're a little more closely aligned with the county for their services. A lot of these areas didn't have the tax base to provide their own services. Mill Creek kind of was a break even. They could provide their own, or they could share services. These other communities didn't quite have the same tax base to do that. But they are incorporated, and they've chosen the metro township path of incorporation. And so with this change, actually, unincorporated Salt Lake County went from about 160,000 people. So to put it in perspective, unincorporated Salt Lake City has a population of about 190,000. And unincorporated Salt Lake County, at least when I was elected, had a population of almost 170,000. So if unincorporated county had been a city, it would be the second largest city in the state, almost the size of Salt Lake City. Now they're all incorporated, and the population of unincorporated county today is about 5 to 8,000. So it really is the unincorporated areas are the not urban areas. So the canyons, Big and Little Cottonwood Canyon, excluding Alta, is unincorporated. The Ochres are unincorporated, and there's population throughout those areas. And then there's some islands throughout Sandy that are unincorporated. So it's very different. I think it's good to have that local voice now at the community level that's advocating to the county what the community wants to do. And yet the county still provides services. In fact, we provide services for about half of the Salt Lake Valley. So not only Mill Creek, but here in Holiday, we provide a lot of, not all of the services, but many services in Holiday. In fact, the county provides services to every city in the valley. Salt Lake City, probably the least. We provide animal services to Salt Lake City, and that's about all of the municipal type services that we provide. Some communities we provide almost all of the municipal type services. I think it's been a dramatic evolution, but I think we're on a path to some, good citizen engagement that I think is good governance.
So if you're keeping score, you should tell her to put one up on government work.
Government works.
Gives 1 point.
Okay.
We'll see who wins. Government works or doesn't work. Depends on. I can come up with a lot of examples on the other side too. Yeah. Of course, county government always works, but we can talk about state government.
When I was mayor of West Jordan, in fact, today what I was asked to talk about is when government doesn't work and how maybe you can make it work better. So one of the things I noticed when I've owned my own business, I've worked for myself since I was 20, so I have a little bit of an idea of what it takes to manage a business, what it takes to run an organization, and even though I'm basically self-employed, I use a lot of staff. I have an accountant, I have an attorney, I have a marketing person. Of course, I don't need them full-time, but I use all those people and many other people to help make my business a success. So when I was elected into this council manager form of government, which many of the cities that you guys live in, now I don't know about this group specifically, but for example, West Jordan, West Valley, South Jordan, Draper, all have some form of that. Orem, I could probably go on. Holiday here. So what happens is the city manager is the CEO, so he runs the day-to-day operations, but he's supposed to do it under the guidance and direction of the city council. And in our form of government, specifically, the mayor was the only one that could bind the city, and the mayor represented the city in all of its outside relationships. One of the things that I saw that was sorely lacking was any oversight by the council. For example, we were supposed to monitor finances. That's part of our job, just to make sure that we were representing the people's, because it's your money. It's public money. We only got 2 documents a year. We got the audit and we got the budget. Well, we got the proposed budget, but the final document, the budget. Nothing in between. We had no idea what was going on month to month. It took me a year and a half of struggling with the staff to get what is essentially public information. But I found that this is not unusual. As I was finishing my undergrad before I got into law school, one of my professors, we kind of settled on a paper I would do, which was, how is the council manager form of government working in the Valley? So I interviewed quite a few city managers, and I found pretty universally my experience was not unusual. It's actually quite usual. The problem is city councils are abdicating to the staff almost across the board. So you folks are not being represented because the staff is running the council. The council is not running the staff. Now, it's true, you need their expertise. I really appreciate good people. My accountant has kept me out of a lot of trouble over the years. And without him, I can honestly say I would be in big trouble. But there's a difference between using your staff to make the best decisions and having your staff dictate to you how things are going to work. And so how this impacts folks like yourself is y'all may be frustrated when you're going to your city and you're saying, well, gee, you've been promising me this park, because you're talking to your council person, forever. And the park has never happened. And every year we're up here asking for it, and every year it's not happening. Why is that? Well, primarily the staff is creating the budget. They're creating all the policy documents, and if that stuff doesn't get into those policy documents, you can talk to your council but most of your council members are not even reading those policy documents. I hate to say that, but it's very true. I won't say that's true of every council person, but I've been in enough meetings, I've participated enough and watched my own council and then subsequent councils, and there might be one or two that are really good about this, and then the rest are just allowing themselves to be pushed along. So what can you folks do to make it better? Because really that's what you want to know. First off, when you have a problem with the city, you have to stop thinking about my problem. This is my problem. Cities don't care about that. They care about policy. And you might say, well, what's the difference? Policy has to do with, are we going to have high density housing? Are we going to have low density housing? And then pretty soon we start shaping that policy by everything from what ordinances and resolutions are passed to how much money we're going to put into that, who we're choosing for planning commission. All of these things begin to shape and support that policy. So recently, I'll tell you, this is a microcosm of how y'all need to start thinking in terms of solving problems by how is this a policy decision? What policy decision can I take to my council that they can begin the process of making a change that I think needs to happen for this community? So I have a client, I have an insurance business, and I can't advise him as a law student because I would never be able to take the bar, but as a former elected official, I can. So his problem was, he lives in West Valley City, is he wanted to do an attached over his patio. And the city's like, this is not going to work. This doesn't meet our setbacks. The only way you can have this is if it's detached. Then you can do it. But you can't attach it to your house. Well, he talked to all these engineers. He talked to all these different people that knew about construction. And they said that's actually a less safe way of doing it than attaching it to the house. The city's like, we've had this policy a long time. We're not changing it. Y'all probably, have any of you heard that before? Okay, so what's wrong with this picture? Does that policy still function the way it should? What I said to him is this. What you need to think about is, you've told me that neighbors of yours have been negatively impacted by this same ordinance. He said yes. And he starts rattling off all the people who can't do certain things with their property that you would think you should be able to do. I said, well, let's think about this. This has been on the books for a long time. What used to be true for this community? Small houses, large lots. What's happening now? Large houses, small lots. So because of that, the policy that they've had for so long, that they were totally wedded to, probably is outdated. So unless they want to go back to large lots with small homes, I bet those setbacks aren't really serving the community the way they should. And that's how you have to start thinking about it, is why is this policy no longer serving the community the way it maybe once did, especially if they're standing on, well, we've had it a long time and it's worked really well for us. Okay? You have to start thinking, well, why isn't it working anymore? And in their case, it's because the city had begun to change policies with regard to development. And those policies were now making it impossible for people to really enjoy their homes the way that they should. So he drafted a letter, went in with that policy argument about how now that the city was approving large lots on smaller homes, they needed to look at setbacks. And they needed to look at how those setbacks were negatively affecting the community and how they should be adjusted for today's reality. And he did a really good job of the letter. And you know what? They changed it. They changed it. But that's what you have to do. You can't just think about it in terms of, this is my problem. If this problem is happening continuously throughout the community, or at least enough so that you're hearing about it from other people, as he had, you have to start thinking about, how can we look at this policy and see, does it need to be tweaked? Does it need to be changed so that it's serving the community better? When you start thinking in those terms, then you're going to be less frustrated trying to get that changed. The other thing is you can't go in and, like, there was a lot of contention between him and the building person. I don't know what all. I didn't get involved in it. I'm like Switzerland. I'll just give you advice, but I'm not getting involved in all these personalities. And that's the main thing, is it doesn't matter. And let me just also give you this little piece of information. You don't want to go to the building inspector with your idea, because he's invested in keeping things the way it is. You know why? Because it's easier. You make a change, he has to change everything. He doesn't want to change everything, trust me. He just wants to keep doing his job. So what you have to do is you have to make that policy argument that he made to the full city council, which is what he did. He took, I think West Valley gives you 3 minutes or 4 minutes to go in and propose something or discuss something with them. He took that opportunity, they invited him back, and that opened the discussion for the change. But he didn't, it's like I told him, because he had written in a lot of, like, the personality issues. I made him take all of that out. It doesn't matter if you think they're a jerk. That's unimportant. You've got to stick to the facts, to the policy, and how this is going to improve the community. And you will have a much better chance of making the kind of changes that you think are going to be important for a community.
Well, thanks, Donna. That was provocative, and so was Mayor McAdams. And I think so I have a million things I'd like to talk about, of course, but I'm going to try to set up, Ben, if I might, your desire to discuss initiatives relieving homelessness. And I have a West Jordan tie-in, too. So a colleague at work last night got my ear, and he said, "Hey, I hear you're going to be on a panel tomorrow night, and the topic is local government, not just about fixing potholes." I know what you should tell them. You should tell them they're wrong. It is about just filling potholes. Because you know why Ralph Becker didn't get elected in my neighborhood? Because he didn't fill the potholes. I'm like, okay. And are they filled now? He's like, yes, the streets in my neighborhood are all perfectly smooth. So he got involved and sought change. His politics is probably a little bit more libertarian than mine are. And a lot of us want local government to be more than filling potholes. And the recent West Jordan City Council resolution asking the state legislature to put teeth in our hate crimes law at the state level is an impulse, a gesture in this direction that local government should be more than just providing essential services. And this is reflected across the country in a lot of local governments, especially in cities. Cities who are worried about issues of equity and opportunity, who are seeing issues of kind of social justice issues and social services becoming less and less important for the national government, and resources even under Democrats, right, but with Republican Congress getting fewer and fewer from the federal government. And our government is largely a pass-through for a lot of our state government. Utah state government is largely a pass-through for these federal funds. That is, if it's not drying up, it's getting more and more scarce, right? And so local governments feel this impulse to fill that gap, to fill that vacuum that the federal government in the past has been the main protagonist for. Issues of opportunity and equity and social services. And so the issue, for example, of dealing with our issues with homelessness here is exactly one of those issues. Salt Lake City couldn't deal with it on its own, just the amount of resources that are needed, but also the complex division of labor that's going on between the state, the county, nonprofits, the city, needs coordination at a higher level. And so, the coordination was absolutely a sine qua non for an issue like this, but it's all local. I mean, boy, we want more federal money, but we can't ignore the problem, and certainly the feds aren't going to save us. Right? The feds are not providing solutions for a lot of these issues that once at certain times we relied on them, really since LBJ and the Great Society, right? Trying to solve significant issues of civil rights with federal initiatives. Well, if those days are over, local governments are going to want to do a lot more than provide just basic city services. So what kind of space do we have for that? And I want to pass the microphone back to Ben to ruminate on that a bit. I think local government should really help provide belonging for people. A home. I mean, a home is a necessary precondition for anybody's happiness. All human endeavor rests on someone feeling comfortable in a community, amongst friends and in larger communities, to have a home. And I think, enhanced hate crime penalties for people who are targeting those because of their race, religion, their sexual orientation or gender identification, those people who have been on the margins of society in the past who don't feel at home can't participate in the things that we call, the pursuit of happiness. And the segue to Ben's issue of homelessness is just too easy, right? I mean, it's about providing safety, but it's also about providing belonging. I want everybody in our local communities to feel like they belong, because we can't do much more in life if we don't. And boy, that's a tall order, right? Providing belonging. I thought government was just supposed to fill potholes.
You're supposed to throw softballs to me. That's
I pitched it down the middle a little.
So my theory on government is that I believe in limited government. We want people to have the freedom to live their lives. But where government, I think, has a role is where there's a benefit that can be shared broadly, but the cost of that benefit is narrowly focused. So think the classic. Let's think of roads, right? To build a road, the cost of building that road is very focused on 20 feet wide and a linear street. But the benefit of that road is going to be very, very broad. It's throughout the whole community. Think of building I-15. The benefit of I-15 is shared by so many people throughout this state. And when the federal government came in and funded the highway program, we saw the national economy surge, because connecting communities meant that we could trade with each other, we could have shipping, and our economies could benefit each other. So the benefit of that road was the interstate highway system was shared across the entire country. Many people benefited from that, but you had the cost of building that road was very focused and very narrow. So government is well suited to capture, if there's going to be broad benefit, well, through taxes we can capture that benefit and we can bring it in to build the road. So I look at that as kind of my theory on when government action could be justified. Not to say that in every instance we're going to act, but I'll give you an example that hits the county directly. Is the Salt Palace Convention Center. So the Salt Lake County owns and operates the Salt Palace Convention Center. Conventions, we lose money on conventions. The cost of maintaining that building, of bringing in conventions. When we had the outdoor retailers here, we would lose money when the outdoor retailers came here. The convention, the Salt Palace would lose money, but we would do that because it brought in 30,000 people who shopped and ate at restaurants and stayed in hotels across, really, outdoor retailers, they're staying in hotels from Ogden to Provo. And so there's a broad benefit to the Salt Palace. So much so that, we lost a few $100,000 on operating the convention center. but yet we had a $30 million economic impact over a 1 week period countywide. Now that does translate to taxes to us, but it also translates to jobs and people's prosperity and vibrancy and restaurants that are vibrant. So in that sense, if we left it to the private sector to run the Salt Palace, they couldn't do it because the benefit, everyone else would receive the benefit, and yet the Salt Palace would lose. So there's a role for government in there to say we can capture the hotel taxes that are paid in Sandy City and in Salt Lake City and across this valley, and we can subsidize our Salt Palace operations through those hotel taxes. So that's where I think government plays a role, because we can capture some of that broader benefit and we can focus it on a narrow need. And so I think the same thing with homeless services. Salt Lake City, the homeless services, and this is it gets really complicated. It's not for lack of trying that we have kicked the can down the road for years on homeless services, because that is not an easy situation to address. But homeless services, so when I started diving into homeless services, it's been about 3 years now, I said, well, first I need to understand how the services are provided. And I asked my staff, how much do we spend? How much is spent, maybe by the county, but by everybody? How much is spent on homeless services every year? And what does the system look like? And, actually it started, I'll tell you just real quickly, it started a little bit before that, where I had the HUD, Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, came to me and they said, we want you to sign this pledge, the mayor's pledge to end homelessness. And I said, well, that sounds great. What's the plan? They said, well, just sign it. Everybody's signing the mayor's pledge to end homelessness. We just want you to sign it. And I said, well, what does ending homelessness mean? Because I know there's always going to be someone who gets evicted from a home, or someone who's fleeing domestic violence and looking for safety. You're going to have people who are homeless. What does ending homelessness mean? You're just overcomplicating it. Everyone else is signing this pledge. Just sign the pledge, is what they said. And I said, okay, I'm not going to sign the pledge until I understand what I'm pledging to do. And so I went to my staff and I said, what does ending homelessness look like? What does a successful homeless services system look like? And they said, I don't know, the road home, they want to provide meals to people, and the YWCA wants to make sure that women get connected to jobs. And they started telling me what all these different providers are doing. And I said, but as a system, the whole system, what does a successful system look like? We didn't have any goals. We didn't have any metrics or anything. And I said, well, tell me if we're going to change the system and reform the system to end homelessness, I need to understand how the system is made up and what's in the system. So how much do we spend on homeless services? Well, we've got, $3 million that comes in the CDBG grant. We got $2 million in SSBG and the state fund stuff, and Catholic Community Services is really generous. And there was no answer really to what does the system look like. It was kind of the same answer. So I said, well, let's step back and let's map. I said, I want to map the whole homeless services system. We called it mapping the genome of homeless services. How much money do we spend on homeless services? So it took some time to gather everybody's budgets and how much people were contributing. And we got kind of a rough number, a pretty good ballpark number. And this, mind you, this was a couple of years ago, so the numbers will have changed. But in the Salt Lake Valley, we spend $52 million per year on homeless services. About 20 million of that comes from Salt Lake County. About 20 million comes from the state of Utah. The third largest provider is philanthropy, combination of Catholic Community Services, the LDS Church, many generous family names that we all know in Utah who generously give. That comprises the bulk of the funding of homeless services. It was surprising that Salt Lake City at the time spent less than $1 million of the 52. Less than $1 million came from Salt Lake City. Well, I'm getting there, exactly. So where does Salt Lake City spend? It is the emergency services, the police, the ambulance, those are Salt Lake City emergency rooms, which is not funded by Salt Lake City, but it's really funded by our insurance premiums. We spend $52 million on homeless services, almost $45 million on services related to homelessness. So I say the $52 million that's money that's spent at least helping people get better. The $45 million is money spent because the system's not working. And you're always going to have breakdowns in the system, but man, if we could shrink those unnecessary ambulance rides and put it into housing or put it into just getting people well, that would change so many lives. And so we started looking at that system. And it's really complicated, as Luke said. It's county and it's state and it's city. Most of the homeless services, many of the homeless services, are located in Salt Lake City. So Salt Lake City, even though they weren't funding the direct services, they were funding the indirect services. I'll give you a couple more statistics, and then I haven't solved the problem for you. That we do have solutions we're working on, but I just want you to understand how complicated the system was and why maybe government wasn't working. I don't think anyone sat and said, well, let's not solve this problem. Let's just kick it down the road and we'll wait another year. I don't think that was ever a conscious decision, but it is really complicated. If you're the mayor of Salt Lake City or the mayor of Salt Lake County and you want to solve this problem, you cannot do it alone. You have a lot of times we'll say, well, this program isn't working, we're going to fund this program. And that provider who has a program that's not working would go and then get a grant from somebody else, and you can't move the system. It's just you poke it in one place and it changes, and it keeps, and there's no way to affect it. I'm going to tell you a couple of quick statistics and then pass it off. So we started saying, we mapped the money. Then I said, I want to map the system, what the system looks like, and what's happening to people in the system. So we have one group that's called chronically homeless. This is a definition under HUD that means it's someone who's been homeless for a period of time greater than a year or had extended episodes of homelessness more than 3 in a 2-year period. So this is chronically homeless. It represents about 8% of the total homelessness population. And so we're starting to look at it, and I asked the question, and this is what the pledge to end homelessness related to, is they wanted to end chronic homelessness. And actually Utah's done a really good job. We did get chronic homelessness to 0. And I thought it was kind of funny because we're all patting ourselves on the back. I actually declined to take the victory lap and pat ourselves on the back because everybody's nationwide, we're patting ourselves on the back for having such reductions to chronic homelessness. And I think, if I'm a member of the public, we're saying chronic homelessness has gone to 0, but there are hundreds of homeless people downtown. Explain to me why there are hundreds of homeless people and you're telling me that you've ended homelessness, you know? And so I said, I want to understand, if we've ended chronic homelessness, why are there hundreds of people congregating in the downtown? Who are they? And the answer was, they're not chronically homeless. And the reason they're not chronically homeless, they've been homeless for a long time, but the federal definition says if you've been housed, then you're not homeless. And guess what counts as housing? Going to jail. So a third of the homes, so 8% are chronically homeless, and we've actually reduced them. They're in permanent supportive housing, places like Palmer Court or other great facilities that do incredible things. But a third of our homeless look and feel and for all intents and purposes are chronically homeless, except they spend on average 3 months every year in the Salt Lake County Jail. And because they do that, they're not chronically homeless. HUD says the homeless services system will say, they left, they must have been housed, congratulations, they're success. And the jail says, oh look, here's a criminal. They don't recognize him as a homeless person. They're not talking to each other. Here's a criminal who comes in, they spend some time, and then they leave, and the jail doesn't know where they go. And the homeless services system says, oh, well, here's a new homeless person who we haven't seen before who's coming back to the system. And we said, clearly the system is broken. If the single largest provider of homeless services is the Salt Lake County Jail, and people leaving the jail don't leave to a job and housing. They are not successfully leaving. But the system, both systems thought that they were being successful, and their data was showing them to be successful. When we matched up the data sets, we saw we were massively failing, and we had to address that. So we recognized this population. We named the population the persistently homeless to differentiate from chronically homeless, but they are persistently homeless, and we're saying we have got to stop this cycle from shelter to jail, back and forth, with people who are arrested and sent to jail 20, 30 times a year. And that's a lot of tax dollars that are being spent. That actually, the jail, we didn't count the jail in that $45 million number. So you could add another 15 to 20 million to that number of the jail serving as a homeless provider. And they are the worst homeless provider in the whole system. And we want them to not be a homeless service provider. We want them to take dangerous people and either help them to overcome their criminal tendencies or incarcerate them if they're dangerous, but treat their mental illness, help them to get on a path to recovery. but not just serving as a really, really expensive shelter. So that's an area where government didn't work. I think we're getting better now. We've realized the problem. We're coming together, the city, the county, the state. That's where we pulled together our collective impact group, and we have 30 different people who sit on collective impact. All of those people, the sheriff running the jail, the police, the city, the county, the Catholic Community Services, the LDS Church, representatives of philanthropies, representatives of homeless service providers, have been sitting around now for 2.5 years figuring out how we fix, where are the bottlenecks in the system and how we fix the system. And so I think we're starting to work, but it took a Herculean effort to get everybody aligned and working toward the same goal.
So in that same vein, having to do with wanting government to address issues, what typically do they come to y'all for? Bonds to support new schools, open space, trails. I mean, we've seen bonds for everything, and we're going to continue to see them coming up. But the biggest problem we have with bonding, and as cities try and counties and so forth to do more for transportation, roads, etc., what I've seen, and this is really a job for the community to start holding your elected officials' feet to the fire with these. Because, for example, let's look at the Jordan School District's bond for schools, the one that failed recently. I'm sure y'all remember that. It failed in the last couple of years. Do you know why it failed? Do any of you really know? It failed because the first bond that everybody supported, I mean, it was supported with overwhelming support, was supposed to build all the schools they needed for the next so many years. But instead, they built little Taj Mahals in some of these schools, and so money was taken. Instead of having your basic good school, they were putting in things like stadium seating, indoor running tracks, televisions on the walls, things like this that were not essential for the school, but they were nice amenities, but it ate up that bond money. So then they went back to the well, and the people went, wait a minute, we just said we were going to pay for this, and we approved it, and then you guys didn't do what you said. So one of the things that I've been trying to educate people about is when somebody's putting a bond on there, ask them, what's the plan? And have you put it in writing? Have you adopted that plan? Have you put numbers to that plan? Like, okay, we're going to build 12 schools. Well, what does that look like cost-wise? What kind of schools? Have you identified the locations? Are you working with the superintendent? Have you thought this through? A few years back, before I moved out of West Jordan, they put a bond on the ballot for open space. That sounds nice, right? Open space. And that's what they sold. And I said, what open space? Where is it going to be? Do you have options on any property? Have you identified the parcels? But that discussion got bulldozed by the idea of open space. It was such a good idea. But the reality is, without the plan, they bonded, they got the money, and they did exactly what I knew that they would do. They frittered it away on little tiny things that really did not change the dynamics of open space in West Jordan. So my suggestion, as cities are trying to, say, address issues, and always money is a component of addressing those issues, if they're putting a tax or a bond up for you guys to approve, what's the plan? And clear and specific plan. Even down to, once the building's built, have you guys thought about what the maintenance of that building's going to cost? I mean, seriously, these kinds of discussions are not happening. So then all of a sudden you get maybe the thing built, but they can't run it because they have no money for the maintenance because they didn't think about that. Now, this all seems pretty logical, but surprisingly, it doesn't happen very often. So if you want to make sure that your tax dollars are being utilized to their optimum benefit, when you're asked for money and you have to go in and vote on it, you go to those folks that are making this proposal to you and you ask them specifically, what are we doing with this money? not generally. We're going to increase open space, or we're going to build more schools. How many more schools? Where are they going to be? What population are they going to serve? You know, you need that information, because what you're going to do is you're going to force them to think about it, to actually have to come up with a plan. Because if they don't have a plan, say, I'm not supporting it without a plan. That will force them to do their job, which is to make sure that the tax money they're taking from the community is going into those things that you guys support, so that it's not being frittered away or squandered. And that's what happens. They can't help it. It's not like they go in with the idea that they're going to do that. The open space bond, I know the people behind it. They had a very, let's just say, reasonable intent in putting that bond before the people. But they didn't have a plan. So even though they had good intentions, it failed, because it didn't do what it was designed to do, or what the intent of the people that were proposing it. So had they come to the people and said, we've put an option on this property here, we're going to build this trail here, we've put this into a resolution, City Council has passed the resolution, this is our plan, then if they didn't do that stuff, you just know they're liars. But without a plan, they're not liars, they're just bad planners. And so then what happens is the money just goes away, and then they want to come back and say, well, we didn't do it right last time, but next time we will, we promise. Kind of like with the school board, with, you know, the Jordan School District. This time we'll finish building those schools. Really? What's the cost? How many schools? Again, no plan. So this is the kind of stuff that average citizens can make a difference with their communities, because you can start forcing the people who are making these policy decisions for you to actually explain to you, because then it forces them to actually think about what they're doing and how they're going to do it. You make them better politicians, you get a better outcome. It's a little uncomfortable sometimes, I can tell you. But again, if you're asking for my money, I don't really have a problem making you uncomfortable.
So do we really have a homeless plan? And how are we going to fund it?
We do have a plan. So a few decisions. So we to come back to the story, we said that we mapped this. We mapped what's coming into the system, what happens when people are in the system, and how do they leave. And we have a great graphic that I can show you, but I don't have it. We found a few flaws in the system. First of all, if you want to receive homeless services, if you're vulnerable, if you're financially in a risky situation, you have to go to the homeless shelter. That's one of, and you can see why we have services that are set up to help the homeless, but you have somebody who, let's say, they're living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by, and dad, primary wage earner, comes down with the flu and misses 4 days of work. They can't make rent. They're kicked out of their home. Well, if they can't make rent and they say, I need help, I'm going to lose my home, we say, we'll help you get back into a home once you're in the shelter, but come talk to us once you're in the shelter. So we almost encourage people to come down, or if they have an illness or something, we have indigent healthcare services, but you have to be in the shelter to receive them. So we say, come down to the shelter, and then we'll help you. It is really hard, and what we found is really hard and really expensive to get somebody out of homeless services, where we could go to that person who came down with a flu and is going to lose their home, and we work with them and we give them a one-time subsidy to stay in their home, and then they are fine. But once they, and imagine the trauma of a child being pulled out of their school in the middle of the year, moving to the shelter, all the psychological trauma with that. They're huge. The data shows intergenerational consequences to that. They're more likely to be homeless. So we looked at our system and we said, okay, so first of all, we're seeing the system is actually encouraging homelessness rather than encouraging it and then trying to solve it. We could fix that. We saw a lot of things we could fix. We have one shelter, the Road Home, that has capacity for 1,100 people, and so that is a great. If the goal of our system, we started asking ourselves, what's the goal? if the goal of our system is to make sure that nobody is hungry and nobody sleeps on the street, we actually do that really well. It costs us about $7 per person per day to give them 3 meals and a bed. And that's noble, and I think that's to be, I'm not critical of that. That's to be commended that we are a community that does that. But I said I want our goal to be more than that. I want our goal to be to help somebody get access to drug treatment, access to behavioral health treatment, access to training for job skills or whatever they may need, so they can rise above just scraping by. And I always use the phrase to have a greater degree of independence. Now, for some people that may mean 100% independent, never back in homeless services again. Others, some of our chronically homeless, it may mean they're probably going to live in subsidized housing for the rest of their lives, but they may have a job from time to time. They may lose their job from time to time, but they're going to be sober. They're going to be not in and out of the criminal justice system, that they're, and so we can get them to a greater degree of self-reliance. But what we found is our system then, in trying to provide a meal and a bed as inexpensively as possible, we kind of do a one-size-fits-all thing. So you have and if you want to help somebody overcome the root causes of their crisis, you can't do one-size-fits-all. You need to recognize that the domestic violence victim is different than the person trying to overcome a substance addiction, as different than the kid who just aged out of foster care. And when you put them all into the same facility, what happens is they get worse. You have the domestic violence victim sleeping in the same building as a violent felon. You have the recovering addict sleeping in the same facility as a drug dealer, someone who is homeless because they have a conviction for drug dealing. And you put them all in the same facility. Yes, they've got a meal, and yes, they've got a bed, and their problems make each other's problems worse. So what our first proposal was to say, we can't one size fits all this. We've got to get individual populations into facilities that can better serve their needs. And we weren't the first people to have this idea. There are facilities like this already in the Salt Lake Valley. Think of the YWCA that serves women who are victims of domestic violence. You have the Volunteers of America Youth Resource Center in downtown Salt Lake City. Salt Lake County has a facility called now I just want to use the word for forgot the name of it. I'm thinking Lantern House, but that's the shelter in Ogden. So Milestone House is the Salt Lake County facility that takes kids who have aged out of the foster care system. The last place we want those kids is in Rio Grande, close to a quick buck if you're willing to deal drugs and easy access to drugs. We want those kids in a program where they've got adult mentors and peer support, and we can help them transition into adulthood and get a job that can sustain them, get into college in many cases, community college. So we find if we put them all into the same place, we're making the problem worse. So our recommendation was 1,100 beds is way too big if you want to address the individual causes of homelessness. It's also way too big if you want to maintain public safety in a community, if you want to have a community that can absorb those facilities. Just way too big. So we recommended breaking that into smaller facilities and separating those a little bit so the community can absorb it. You can actually have pro-social activities there that the community can go in and integrate those individuals into their community and have it be a positive thing. And so that was the first recommendation that led to us going out and finding locations for new homeless shelters. The worst experience I've ever had as a politician sitting on a stage in Draper for 4.5 hours and getting yelled at. And I felt bad for myself until Lawrence got up on the stage and said he wanted to thank the homeless providers who had helped him in his moment of crisis, and Lawrence got booed off the stage. So you remember that. I'm sure you all saw that in the news. But that's the first part of the plan, and we went to the state and asked for funding to help to build those facilities. We got about half of the funding with the expectation that we would go out and fundraise the remainder of that, and that process is underway right now to raise the difference. I'll tell you a quick story. So the Miller family has donated $10 million, Gail Miller, to help to fund some of the services in these facilities, because we want this to not just be a place to get a meal and a bed, but it's a place to help somebody get the services that they need to get back on their feet. And so she has put forward $10 million to fund the services in these facilities. It's a matching grant, so we're supposed to raise the other $10 million, and we're working on raising another $10 million to match the Miller funding. Got the sweetest email the other day from a young man who said he donated $8. He said it's the most he can afford, but he wanted to give it. He's being raised by his grandmother, and his mother is in the Rio Grande. She's a heroin addict, and he hopes one day to have his mother back. So, yes, that's the first phase of the plan. Then is to build these new facilities, and then to operate these facilities in a way that they're not just a meal and a bed, but they are resource intensive. That these are a place where we get people, they come in a moment of need, we connect them to the services, whether it's substance addiction that they need help with, employment help, housing help, and we get them, and rather than staying in a shelter for months and sometimes years, we're hoping they're there for 30 days, average of 30 days. So it could be 15 to 60 days or something, but an average of 30 days. And then we have places for them, whether it's detox or whether it's a transitional housing or rapid rehousing, where we get them into a housing unit knowing that they're probably not going to be able to pay the full cost of their rent on day one. We'll help them, and depending on their abilities, as we're working with them, as we have more robust case management, we can help them get back on their feet, slowly take off the training wheels and get them back out there stable and self-reliant, or a greater degree of self-reliance. So the shelters are funded pending our fundraising that we're confident we can finish, the new resource centers. We think that the operation of these facilities at the heightened level with additional services is funded thanks to, we're taking the funding that's already going in. So there's already money being spent, and we're just rearranging how those services are provided. So there's that funding, plus some additional state funding that we've already secured, some ongoing funding of about $7 million a year to help to operate these facilities. The big missing piece, there are two big missing pieces. The one is treatment, and our state has failed to invest in treatment, and they ask themselves why there are all these people who are addicted to drugs and on our street and not getting better, and yet they failed to fund the treatment. We did get a commitment over the last month, and this is why I'm supportive of Operation Rio Grande. I was hesitant to support it at first, but we got a solid commitment to increase funding for addiction treatment, behavioral health treatment, an increase of about $100 million. So it's significant. It is, if you compare it to full Medicaid expansion that I'm a supporter of, that would bring, the number I've heard is $300 million. I keep hearing Senator Backus saying $600 million, so I need to talk to him whether he's wrong or I'm wrong. But full Medicaid expansion would be a lot more. But we do have $100 million, which is not insignificant, and very happy. And I'm very happy about that. That'll make a difference. The other piece is housing, and so Salt Lake County this year funded the construction of about 750 affordable housing units. Salt Lake City's working on a similar number. So that's great. I was talking with Luke before we started. Let me just put that in perspective. Let me pat everybody on the back that we're building new affordable housing. It is great, and it will make a difference, and it'll make a difference for this homeless population. But affordable housing is a crisis. Last year, the Gardner Institute reports that there were 28,000 new households created in Utah, either in migration or marriage or different things, but new households formed in Utah, 28,000 last year. Last year, the housing market built 22,000 housing units. So the problem got, as much as we pat ourselves on the back for opening up new housing, the problem got worse by almost, a net of 4,000 units worse last year. So it is the housing thing. I think, Catherine, is the piece. I'd say I'm very confident in the rest of it. It's going to take time to get it all worked out and to iron out the kinks and to get it going. But I'm confident with the plan. I'm confident with the funding. The housing thing is now the highest crisis, and if we can't fix that, we're going to still be in pain.
Why did they go ahead and do the roundup before the various shelters were built? I mean, we had no place to put them, really.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. First, the new shelters will be built and opened by June of 2019. There was a lot of concern about what are we going to do. The Rio Grande area was unsafe. It was lawlessness. It was anarchy in the Rio Grande area. I don't know, Luke, you live down in that area. It got worse. It got really bad in the last couple of years. So there was a desire to do something, and I have to say I supported that desire. I was concerned, so there's nowhere to the new and I don't think it could wait until the new shelters came online. We are as a state and a community, we're saying if you need help, come to Rio Grande to get help. By the way, you might be raped or shot or beat over the head with a brick, but this is the place to come. It was, and not to mention the public down there as well. We had lost control of that area, and we needed to do something. What my hesitation is that and I don't think it could wait until the new shelters, the new resource centers opened. I didn't oppose it, but I had some consternation about the fact that we didn't have treatment resources online at the time. So we did Operation Diversion a year ago, where we said, look, you're going to go to jail, but if you want a different path, if you want to change your life, we have treatment as an alternative. When Operation Rio Grande launched, there was no treatment option. That's how it differed. And it's easy to armchair quarterback in that. So don't interpret this as criticism of my colleagues, but you may have seen in the Salt Lake Tribune an email of mine that came out pursuant to a grammar request, where me and my team were very reluctant to support Operation Rio Grande because the treatment resources weren't there. And there was a meeting that happened the day before we launched, where we met Sunday afternoon, which is hard to do in Utah, to get Republicans to meet with you on a Sunday afternoon. We met on a Sunday afternoon in my office at the county with the lieutenant governor and the speaker and about 15 other people from the state, and Karen Crompton from my team, and Tim Whalen and Noella Sudbury on my team. And we said, we need to be assured that these treatment resources, we had a whole list of questions and concerns. We went through them, and I will say I was satisfied that the commitment to expanding treatment was real, that it was going to come online, that the expansion of the drug court was real and it was going to come online, and the gap between law enforcement and treatment would be weeks, not months. And so with that understanding, I said, I'm not going to let perfect be the enemy of good. It wasn't a perfect operation, but I've been fighting to get expansion of treatment resources for as long as I've been mayor, and to have a commitment on the table from the state to say, we get it, we know treatment's important, we are going to get treatment done. We're going to add 250 beds by January 1st, which would double the amount of residential inpatient treatment in Salt Lake County. That was an incredible offer, and I took the deal.
Thanks, Ben, because we in local government, some of us like yourself, are working on really tough issues, right? And I'd like to zoom out a little bit and try to encourage you all as people who are involved and interested in local politics about how local politics is working. And this comes off ex-Mayor Evans' comments as well about bonds. I think local government works really well in terms of accountability. It can work very well, and accessibility. So the issues of city leaders coming to you and asking you to pony up your property taxes for a big geo bond, for a hazily defined open space bond, or we had a hazily defined public safety building bond in Rocky Anderson's second term in Salt Lake City that failed, I think, because it was hazily defined. That's accountability, right? That is making sure that the people who are going to be in control of spending this money, that they're being watched, and they're going to do it in a way that is in the public interest, and not just in the interest of the government or the administrators or private entities. It's not easy to keep your government accountable, though. Donna, your comment about city council members not really knowing what's going on. And, I was on the city council, and
Some do, but
I didn't feel like I knew enough about what was going on to keep the complex, workings of a modern bureaucracy all in my brain, and, in a way that I can reflect on all that. Government is, even local government is incredibly complex. This is a modern bureaucratic world. And we're all part-time or volunteers. Every city councilor in the state of Utah is either part-time or is volunteering. And when you have a full-time job, to keep your family afloat, support your kids and whatnot, the time that you can take to keep your administrators or your mayor or your city manager accountable is limited a certain amount. So, you know, how many years ago was it the county council had I think it was before your first term, had a proposal to make themselves either full-time or have a full-time assistant. And the firestorm from county voters that people in office are giving themselves a pay raise was, you know, it was out of control. Like it became immediately toxic at the county council. So to make that reform so that we could have full-time legislators, and I really believe that full-time legislators at the local level is a good idea, even though I do have a little reservation about it. I don't like the idea of a political class and people making politics into a profession. It rubs me a little bit the wrong way. You know, I like the American kind of citizen legislator model. But hey, I know that I couldn't represent my constituents well enough because I wasn't full-time. And the other virtue I want to draw our attention to of local government, besides being potentially accountable, is accessibility. You know, I know my city council person, and so do my neighbors. Why? Because they had to come door to door when they were campaigning and let people know who they were and listen to people. Local government is necessarily the closest. And if you want to make change in your neighborhood or your city, government's not that far away. You really can. The advice that I give students is politics is successful in groups. You know, you might be told that you can do something, you can change the world by yourself, and what you do makes a difference. It does, but it's multiplied when you do it in groups. And so the encouraging words that I give you is, you know, think of kind of classic coalition politics. Get together with other people who have a similar interest with you and draw up your goals, and then think of potential allies. And because elected officials do need votes every 2 years or 4 years or 6 years, however often they're running, they need to listen to you, and they will listen to you. One great thing about Utah political culture is that it's not that antagonistic or adversarial. You know, it's hard to blow off somebody who you don't like, especially if you're an elected official or you're trying to get elected. We have a culture of openness here, and I think that that's really important, and kind of a culture of equality too. You know, city council people generally don't have huge egos because they know they don't have very much power. They get chastened all the time. And so I really do think local government is frequently accessible, and you can make it more so by your actions. And accountability comes from a lot of different places, right? I want to mention the press. And the press is absolutely essential. You know, it's too bad that we don't get local press following West Jordan politics enough, right? Because if we had reporters who had the time to look at the data and make sure that, you know, what the government's claiming is adding up or not adding up, it makes a huge difference. But local government is the level of government that can be accessible, that can be accountable. And I think when we put those two things together, then it's effective. Donna, your mention about, you know, sometimes you have to be conflictual in the open. You have to tell someone that you think they're wrong. Well, I'm a big believer in doing that because it makes for better policy. It makes for a better outcome. You might have the most enlightened person at the top of a governmental structure who can write perfect laws that are going to move the mechanisms of government perfectly, but they're never going to be omniscient. They need the input of people around them, people above them, people below them. And the more input we have, as long as it's structured in ways that are productive and moving policy along, will result in better outcomes for the public. And it's up to us, citizens, in many different ways. But I think within the level of capacity that we have as volunteers, to, you know, dispense our duties. And I know you're involved in the league because you feel the same way. So we can do it by just doing our parts, I think. And we can do it by doing it with others, because it's always easier and more effective with others. So
I'll just say, so I used to, before I ever ran for office, I worked for Salt Lake City, and I can attest that he doesn't worry about being raising conflict. I used to have to present to the city council, and Luke will say what he thinks, and I can say now the process is better for it. I don't know that I would have said that 8 years ago, whenever. So, but now I can say he's right, and he puts his money where his mouth is, and I have the lashings to prove it.
Sorry for that.
Do we have questions from the? There we go.
We have one.
So we'll take hers first.
Mayor, I'm concerned about homeless people who are camping, for example, here in Holiday. Is there a county plan to deal with that?
So there are homeless people not just in Salt Lake City, but they are indeed in other cities throughout the county. One of the things that we found also in this process is we're asking where homeless people come from, and they don't come from Salt Lake City. So, some do, but they're coming from all over the county. They're coming from all over the state. In fact, some of them are coming from even the Intermountain region. Most of them, almost 90% are coming at least from the Intermountain region, but they're coming from all over the county as they lose a home or face crisis in their home city. And some of them do go back to cities, and you'll see them camping in vacant lots or along the transit line, and you see that. We do have a plan. Our plan is a couple of fold. If they're breaking the law, we take that seriously. And Operation Rio Grande is not just limited to Rio Grande. It will extend to wherever drug dealing and law breaking is happening. That increased commitment of law enforcement will go to where there's crime. So if you see crime, please let us know. Other people may not be committing crimes, but they're camping and they're in your communities, and that may make you feel unsafe as well. We are going out. The county is working with Volunteers of America, and we do outreach. And we go to those individuals, and if you let us know where they are, we'll go. And we ask them to please come back for services. Many of them will tell you that they are not downtown because they did not feel safe. And so we're telling them it's changed down there. It is safe down there. Please come back. There are services there. I said the Road Home has capacity of about 1,100. Right now, there are about 600 people sleeping at the Road Home. There's plenty of room. And there's food and there's shelter and there's help for them. Please come back downtown. Volunteers of America, who goes out, and we partner with Volunteers of America because sometimes the government, they're not receptive to government because we are the police force and we are scary to them. So we partner with a nonprofit who comes out and says, look, we're not here to arrest you. We're here to transport you. We'll get a bus. We'll bring you a van. We'll drive you back down to downtown. There are services for you to receive there. So we do that. Cleanups, we also are partnering with the cities to do cleanups where there are homeless encampments or abandoned homeless encampments where we can clean up some of the debris that may be left behind. The county has no authority to actually come in and clean it, but the health department will come. The county health department can come in, and because it is a health violation and there's concerns to public health because of some of these encampments, we can ask them to leave their encampment because of the public health violation, and that's when we'll ask them to come back downtown. And then the city will come in. We usually do these in conjunction with the city. The city will then come in with their public works department and clean up the debris. So that's our plan. It takes time. I would ask you if you can be patient as we are doing this outreach. We are out in every city in the county right now doing some of this cleanup. It won't happen overnight, but if you would please let us know where you see any debris or people maybe in need of help, let us know. You can reach out to Salt Lake County Health Department. It's on that website. Reach out, let them know where you see, or your city, your respective city, wherever you live, that you see an issue, and they can let us know, and we can come out and do our outreach and work to get that addressed.
I saw some other hands.
Yes.
I was going to ask, how much of the homeless problem would be solved if you had a living wage?
Yeah. Some of it would be solved, not all of it. A living wage would certainly make a difference. There is, economic hardship is a cause of homelessness, but it's not the only cause. I think I don't have the statistics off the top of my head. Better wages would solve it. We still have housing, and so I guess better wages may address housing. We have a lack of housing, so to some extent, if you're an economist, you would say if we pay more and you still have a lack of housing, the prices of housing are going to go up. So we do need higher wages. We do need more housing to just be built. But also, as Luke mentioned, Medicaid expansion. A lot of homelessness, there's an underlying behavioral health, mental health, and they're then using drugs because it's a way to self-medicate some of their mental illness. That would, even if there's a livable wage available to them, without a proper treatment, they're not going to be able to earn that livable wage. So we do need Medicaid expansion. We're getting that's the $100 million I'm talking about is a partial expansion of Medicaid. It'll do a lot of good. It's not full Medicaid expansion, which is what I would prefer, but it would do a lot of good, the partial expansion. So it would help. It wouldn't solve the problem.
So, talking about expansion, Medicaid expansion, the waiver that we're waiting on back in Washington, D.C., do you know the ratio of how much that will impact the homeless people? Because it's the low end of people in poverty and stuff, and also people coming out of prison and trying to reintegrate back into the community and that. I can't imagine that would be all homeless people. So do you know the impact that would have on the homeless?
It would be many of the homeless. So let me give you a few numbers. Full Medicaid expansion, they estimate, would provide health care coverage to everyone who's at the 133% of the federal poverty level or below. So that would cover about 100,000 people in the state of Utah. I'll give you some numbers that I think emphasize why I prefer full Medicaid expansion. So full Medicaid expansion is made possible under the Affordable Care Act, which I think is probably a big part of the reason why it's not going forward. But it's under a 90-10 split. So for every $10 that we put forward locally, the federal government will match it with $90. So under full Medicaid expansion, we estimate we'd have to put forward roughly $30 million of state funding. That $30 million of state would be matched with $270 million of federal dollars, or you'd have about a $300 million expansion that would cover a lot of people, 100,000 people. The partial expansion, we just call it the extension of Medicaid right now, is under the old Medicaid rules, which is a 70-30 split, so it's much smaller. So the same $30 million of state funding would be matched by $70 million of federal funding, equating to $100 million. So the way they've structured that is it would help the poorest of the poor. And the poorest of the poor have much more expensive needs. So these people are more expensive to serve. So $300 million would serve 100,000 people. $100 million will serve about 6,000 people. So 94,000 people less will cover with the same $30 million of state funding. So you can see why I say let's just expand Medicaid. So they have to find some way where if you've got 100,000 people in need and you've only got coverage for 6,000, they got to find some way to limit it. So what they've done is they've said we're going to prioritize it. First will be the chronically homeless, of which that's about 8% of our homeless population. Many of them are not in Rio Grande right now. They're in Palmer Court and other permanent supportive housing facilities. Then the next category, after the chronically homeless are covered, then they would cover people who have graduated from a criminal justice treatment program. So this would be a drug court, someone who's enrolled in a drug court or graduated from a program that modeled after, we have this program in the county jail called the CATS program. I don't even know what that stands for, but it's a treatment program in the jail. That's the second tier of people who would be covered. And we think so the extension would cover all of the chronically homeless, probably everybody in the drug court and in a treatment program there. And then the next category is people who have no income. And we think it would probably cover most, probably not all, but most of those people. So the extension would cover probably close to everybody who's homeless who has need right now. So it would do a lot. Who it won't cover, and there's some irony in this, who it won't cover is the person who's working a minimum wage job and and obeying the law. So what you tell that person is quit your job or commit a crime and you got it. But if you're working hard and can't have health insurance, but you're working hard and trying and keeping your nose clean, you're kind of out of luck. So I think that I am critical, and the speaker knows I will say this to him directly. I also do want to recognize that $100 million is incredible, and it's an incredible amount of new resources to 6,000 people. It'll reach almost 100% of the people we're talking about in Rio Grande right now. It'll leave a lot of people still in need in the state, but it will do a lot of good.
This is obviously segued into homelessness, but before we end, I wonder if you would tell us what you think isn't working in your various governments. I think we know, Donna, you talked about the council manager system and how we would change it. So tell us what isn't working and what we can do to change that.
Okay, so when I was listening to Luke talk about how balancing part-time elected officials with trying, to run their real life, which is their family and their home, that is a balancing act. Part of the problem is there's no real training to teach elected officials how to sort of pull out the most important aspects of their city government that they really should focus their efforts on. For example, when I talked about monthly financial statements and budget, nobody knows how to read that stuff. Nobody teaches you how to read that stuff. But yet, the budget drives everything. If it's not in the budget, it's not going to happen. So what's the answer? Well, the Utah League of Cities and Towns supposedly has a training, which I found to be entirely worthless when I took it. That's just my opinion, but I thought it was entirely worthless. So I went on a quest when I was elected mayor to find out, what are these policy documents really, how do you read them? What do they mean? What's an enterprise fund? How does that operate? All that stuff. If the league actually would put together a decent training, then people could balance their lives a little better and be able to be more receptive to, or let's just say be able to parse out the things that are the most important. For example, if you have a budget and every single bureaucracy does this almost to a T. I've looked at so many budgets I cannot tell you over the years. Because like I said, I self-educated. I talked to people who created budgets. I talked to city managers. I talked to everybody and I read 3 books on government budgeting. That was the most boring thing I've ever done in my life. But I read them. And what I found was that money is rat-holed throughout the budget. Okay? So it's rat-holed all over the place. But if you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know it's there. So why is that important? Well, let's just say we're talking about the park again. Go back to the park scenario. We wanted to build in West Jordan a baseball complex because we have a huge interest in that community in baseball. And the staff's always telling us, there's no money, there's no money, there's no money, right? Well, I got the budget out and I saw where all this money was rat-holed around in different places, went to the council, showed them, and we cobbled together enough money to get a design so we could at least get a number on what it would cost us to build. So the point I'm making is that the biggest problem that we have, I think, with these part-time elected officials is that they're not really getting training that helps them to understand how to glean from the volume. I mean, we get volumes of information when you're in local government. I'm sure Luke can tell you that, and you too. And there's no possible way you could read everything. But if you're reading the important things, the things that really make a difference in the way the policies are moving within your respective city, county, whatever, then you can focus your efforts on following it. One of the things I did as a mayor, because, you give direction to your staff. You'd say, okay, this sidewalk has been in the budget every year for 6 years and it's never been built. I don't know if y'all have ever had that experience, but We've had that experience. So what we would start doing at City Council is we'd say, okay, here's a list of things that we really want to have done. And once a month, we would do a checkup. Okay, where is this project? Okay, where is this project now? Okay, where is this project now? You know what? They started getting embarrassed because they hadn't done anything. And we just kept asking until we just wore them down. And eventually, all those projects got built. So what works is helping your council to understand that they need to start tracking those important projects in the community, like holding their staff responsible for whatever it is. You want a crossing guard. They promise they'll get a crossing guard. Crossing guard never shows up. Okay, well, every month, where's that crossing guard? Is it in the budget? Is, have you hired, or, are you advertising yet? Because the squeaky wheel sort of thing works. But the most important thing is these, and I keep calling them policy documents, but that's what they are. Your budget, your long-range planning things. If you don't get these desires of your community into those policy documents, they're never going to happen. They can tell you till the cows come home, oh yeah, we're going to do that. If it's not funded, if it's not written into whatever documents that support that sort of thing, trust me, it is not going to happen. So that's where you begin with, is you find out what is it going to take to get this thing done, and then you start checking to see if they actually inserted that stuff. For example, when I talked about the baseball complex, we put that in the budget by vote. When I went back to the budget 6 months later, it wasn't there. I don't know if y'all have ever... Oh, because the staff didn't want to do it. So they just didn't put it in there. And at that time, I was pretty new. We would get the proposed budget in May. We would do the final vote on the budget in June. But they wouldn't get us the final budget document, the one that we had approved all the changes and whatever we would, until like September, October. So most people's memories are kind of short, And so until this becomes an issue, you don't always check every single thing. So that's why we sat down and went through and then took money out of various people's budgets and cobbled it together and said, okay, we told you to do this, you didn't do it, so now we're taking money from here, 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 and here, and it's going to get done. But that's the point is that the big thing with government is holding them accountable. If they say they're going to do it, check those things that will best support those goals. It might be money, might be an ordinance, might be a resolution. It's hard to know. It depends on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. But that's how you can make government work better. It's really basically about following through and following up.
I would just say quickly, one thing that I think is not working is how government communicates with the public and how the public communicates with government. I think we've had a breakdown in the last several years, and it's on both sides. I think politicians are figuring out that it is really easy to, if I accuse it, and I think it works better at the local level because there's direct communication really is the way. But it is easy to throw out an accusation and, that wasn't transparent or that was secretive or that was, politicians are figuring it out in the world of Twitter and Facebook, and it is easy to just make an accusation. I see the debate about repealing Obamacare, and the comments are, it covers existing conditions. Well, no, it doesn't. But if you say it, people are going to believe it. And so I think how government communicates with the public has been severely distorted, and politicians are figuring out how to manipulate it. And I think also how the public communicates with government, there's such distrust and anger that communication is breaking down as well. I go back to, the experience earlier this year in citing our locations for the homeless shelter. And, I want to differentiate between, I think, I said at the time, my goal with that was to make a well-informed decision, to make sure that and when the legislature tasked me with finding a location, I knew it was going to be painful and ugly. But my goal was to make a well-informed decision. I knew that that information was going to come at a high decibel level. It wasn't going to be, comment cards mailed in or emails. It was going to come in the form of yelling and screaming. But that's public input, and I recognize that. But I'll just tell you, one of my regrets in that process is that Troy Walker, who's the current mayor of Draper, called me in that process, and he had seen what we had been through with these 6 different public meetings and in listening to the public and deliberation. And he said, I've seen how hard that's been for you, and I think Draper can be part of the solution. He says, we have the prison, and the prison is moving outside of our city. And we have a culture of volunteerism in our city, people who have been volunteering at the prison for decades. And I think they're going to miss, Draper's a great city. I think they're going to miss the opportunity to volunteer. And I think that Draper could work. Can we explore that? And I said, yeah, we can explore that. And he said, we would need to do a public hearing to hear what the public thinks about that. But we quickly identified a location that we thought worked, and we picked a day to present this to the public and solicit input from the public on what they thought. And then for 4.5 hours, we got yelled at that we had made a decision in secret, and why didn't we bring it to the public for input? And I tried to say several times, I said, that's what we're doing here. We're asking for your input. And you should have come to us before you made a decision. And I would say, no decision's been made. We're here to, and that meeting, I didn't hear any feedback on whether that site worked or not, or why it did or didn't work. The other meetings, it was yelling, but it was, this site doesn't work because, and that meeting was, how dare you? You're not soliciting public input. And Troy is up. I'm a Democrat. You all know that. Troy's a Republican. He's up for re-election this year, and I don't know if he will win. And this will probably be the issue that kills him. And the unfortunate thing for me is, if he's losing, he's being attacked because he did something in secret and not transparent. And I think that wasn't secret. That wasn't transparent. We did a public hearing. We sat there for 4.5 hours and got yelled at, and that site wasn't chosen. So I do want to criticize politicians, but I also think there's some burden on the public to understand and filter and sift through some of the misinformation that politicians give you. All politicians are guilty of it, except me. I don't know. No, it's a sad world that exists right now, that the public can't trust what you're hearing from your government. You can't always trust what you're hearing from your newspapers, except the City Weekly. I don't know how we fix that. I think it's not working. Communication from government, from politicians to the public is not working, and communication from the public to government is not working. And I don't know how we fix it.
Well, good thing you have me here, Ben. So what I wrote down before Ben started his comments was, what's not working is public engagement. We use that term frequently. It's the term du jour when it comes to what government wants to do, its intentions vis-a-vis the public. It's not just about communicating. It's not just about getting our message out there, our PR message, but it's about engagement. Is it really? It's not, usually. We don't know how to do this very well. And as a political theorist, I'm a bit wrapped around the axle as well, because there aren't easy answers to how we, discern the will of our constituents, the residents in our city or our town or our county. When people show up for a public hearing, we don't know if that group in the room is representative of the population at large. It's probably not. So we don't know really how to gauge that. Is this what the community really thinks, or just the people who came? Donna, you mentioned kind of the desires of the community, right? West Jordan wants to build a baseball complex because it's discerned that that's really in the desire of the community. I think local governments should and can, but we need new techniques. We can really discern the desires of our communities better. I think we're in such a hurry to do a lot of things good for the community. We're lucky enough to be in, national policy circles where we hear the latest and best policy innovations for things that we want to work on and that we ran on. But we are so far ahead of the public with solutions for problems that they may not know we have yet. And I think housing is a great example, and affordable housing. The word about our nationwide affordable housing crisis has reached even the Utah legislature. But people in neighborhoods don't necessarily know that. I mean, I speak to millennials frequently who barely can afford rent, and they know they're never going to afford a mortgage. Well, they feel the squeeze, that's for sure. You might hear from, elderly that they're feeling the squeeze, and some people are very close to this, right? If you're a middle-aged person, you might have kids who can't afford rent, and they're fresh out of college and don't have their good job yet. And you may have your parents who live locally who are squeezed fixed income and are having a problem finding housing in a desirable location. Wouldn't it be great if your kids and your elderly folks could live in the same neighborhood that you do, and you live in a pretty Tony East Bench neighborhood? Well, if we only rely on market rate rents, that's not going to happen. When someone, like the colleague at work who told me a second story, he's saying, well, yes, it is about filling the potholes, and if you don't do that, you'll get unelected. He also told me how he very joyfully berated one of the District 7 city council candidates in Salt Lake City, a fellow who didn't make it through the primary, when that candidate was talking about affordable housing in Sugar House, and that we really needed affordable housing in Sugar House. And my colleague said, you know what I did? I got up in his face and I said, so you want my tax money to pay your rent? Well, a lot of people in our community don't really understand, I think, what, for example, makes a good community. I mean, do we want to price all the people who can't afford high real estate values out of our community? Do we want poor people who don't have an income, they can't work because of various disabling conditions, right? And that a lot of our homeless population qualifies as that, having a disabling condition. Those people have no value for our community. Poor people who are at the federal poverty level, who are working in our kitchens and cleaning our offices and hotel rooms, those people have no value to our larger community. I asked someone who worries about their tax money going to pay for someone else's health care or rent what kind of community they want to live in. Do they want to live in a community that is so undiverse and so homogeneous that only the people who can afford to live in the most expensive city in the state, i.e. Salt Lake City, live there? That's not a good community. Cities get their lifeblood from diversity, all sorts of diversity. Racial, religious, generational, socioeconomic, right? All sorts of diversity is the lifeblood of cities. And this is not kumbaya language. This is like fact. You need a diverse population to have a well-functioning city. So that mention of kind of the whole, and can we step back and look at the city as a whole and not just think that the people with fewer capacities, whether it's to pay for rent or to work a job that pays over minimum wage, that those people don't belong in our community, is a terrible way to think. And it's certainly going to be the undoing of local communities as well as the country. So that public engagement has a large education side, and frequently people in government, because we know so much more than the public, think we have to educate the public. Well, that's not a good relationship with the public either, right? Because it's hierarchical and it's saying that we know what's best and we just need to bring you along. What if governments set their priorities by truly trying to discern what the desires of their residents are and took their time in establishing city priorities and really did a better job in communicating and listening and really, I think, maybe slowing down? So I think that Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County and Utah want to solve the homeless problem. There is a lot of goodwill out there. And there are some jerks, of course, who will get up at the Draper meeting and berate the formerly homeless guy. But that is not a majority of our population at all. What if government slowed down and really engaged and truly engaged? I need a stronger verb than engaged. I don't think one exists unless we're getting inappropriate, really. What if we truly engaged, right, and built community priorities from the bottom up, and then government brings, I think, the community along in the achievement of that. Governments, as powerful as we are, we're not very powerful. Like when the city of Salt Lake tries to get their message out on anything, like we're changing garbage collection, it's really difficult for that government to do it. It's even though we have all of these communication channels. I think we should probably use radio, TV, and billboards more, but we don't because we're being responsible with the public's money. I don't know. But all of that, I think, we can engage the public much better, and we can have shared priorities to a much greater degree, so that we have complaints that, hey, all these decisions have been made in private, behind closed doors, without the public, aren't made as often. And it doesn't have to be that way, especially bringing it back to the local level, because the local level is where we can have genuine engagement with people.
When I start coughing, that means we're over. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. I think we've learned a lot. We are trying to figure out how to engage with you. I would say talk, maybe. That's one way of saying it. For all of you, just to remind you, on Saturday at 1 o'clock at the Marmalade Library, they're having a training for our redistricting issue to distribute petitions. And in case you don't know, the League of Women Voters is very involved in this particular issue. So I hope to see you all there. And again, thank the panel. Thank you.